Claire Miller thought her life had finally reached calm waters. After years of loneliness, she had found a gentle kind of peace in her marriage to David Miller, a quiet man who treated her with care. Their home by the lake in Oregon was the picture of serenity, wide windows opening to the misty water, pine trees framing the backyard, and silence that felt almost sacred. Claire liked that silence. It was safe, predictable. After all, she had lived enough chaos in her younger years. But peace, as she soon learned, can change in an instant. It began when Ethan came home. Ethan was David's son from his first marriage. Claire had met him before holidays, family dinners, short visits where polite smiles replaced real conversations. He had been 20 when she married David, quiet and a little withdrawn, focused on college and distant from family life. She hadn't thought much about him since. But now, at 23, he was moving back home after losing his job in Portland. David mentioned it one evening over dinner. "He just needs a place to get back on his feet," he said casually. Claire had nodded, trying not to let the surprise show on her face. When Ethan arrived 2 days later, the house changed. She heard his car before she saw him, the gravel crunching under tires, the slam of a car door. When he stepped inside, suitcase in hand, Claire noticed how much he'd changed. His hair was a little longer, his frame leaner, his face marked by something she couldn't name: disappointment, perhaps, or exhaustion. He smiled when he saw her, that polite son smile, but there was warmth in it too. "Hey, Claire," he said softly, his voice deeper than she remembered. "Thanks for letting me stay for a while." "Course," she replied, returning the smile. "It's your home too." David welcomed his son with a few strong pats on the back and quickly began talking about practical things: job searches, routines, responsibilities. But Claire barely heard them. She was studying Ethan without realizing it. He seemed older than his age, not in appearance, but in the way he carried himself, measured, calm, yet heavy with unspoken weight. Over the next few days, the rhythm of the house shifted. David left early for work and came home late. Claire stayed home most days, working remotely and managing the house. Ethan spent his time applying for jobs, sometimes stepping outside to take long walks by the lake. They spoke politely, at first just sharing short exchanges about meals, chores, or the weather. But even those small moments felt strangely charged, like something unseen lingered just beyond the surface. One evening, while setting the dinner table, Claire reached for a plate at the same time Ethan did. Their hands brushed. It was nothing, just a touch, but for some reason, the moment froze. Her hand withdrew quickly, a nervous smile crossing her face. He looked at her, not awkwardly, but with quiet acknowledgement, as though both had felt the same jolt and chosen not to speak of it. That night, Claire found herself thinking about that touch far longer than she wanted to. She scolded herself in silence. He was her stepson, and she was a married woman. It was ridiculous, but her thoughts betrayed her anyway. Over the next week, small details about Ethan began to draw her attention. The way he made coffee early in the morning, the sound of his laughter when he spoke on the phone with friends, his quiet patience with which he listened when she talked about her garden or her work. He wasn't loud or demanding like most young men she'd known. He was thoughtful. There was a steadiness in him that reminded her of David, but softer somehow, more open. One afternoon, while she was trimming roses outside, Ethan walked up, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've been out here for hours," he said, handing one to her. She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he replied simply. "You make this place feel alive. Dad's lucky." The comment caught her off guard. It wasn't flirtatious, just sincere. But it stirred something inside hers, something she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she noticed how long it had been since anyone had looked at her and really seen her. That evening, after dinner, David went to bed early, exhausted from work. Claire stayed up to clean the kitchen. Ethan offered to help. They worked quietly, side by side, passing plates, wiping counters, the silence between them strangely comfortable. When she turned to put a dish away, she caught him watching her. He smiled faintly, not shy, not bold, just aware. She smiled back before turning away quickly, pretending to busy herself. Later, she stood by the window watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan walking down to the dock alone, his hands in his pockets. For reasons she couldn't explain. Her heart ached for him, this young man carrying invisible burdens, this stranger who suddenly felt so close. That night, as she lay beside David, listening to his even breathing, Claire couldn't sleep. Thoughts swirled, confusing and unwanted. She wasn't in love, she told herself. It was just empathy, a kind of maternal protectiveness. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't love either. At least not the kind that asked for more. It was connection. Quiet, unspoken, dangerous in its simplicity. In the days that followed, she tried to ignore it. She busied herself with housework, errands, and phone calls. Yet, no matter what she did, she felt the tension under the calm surface of her life. Every time Ethan entered a room, her senses woke up. Every time their eyes met, she felt a spark of something she couldn't name. It wasn't about wanting him. It was about remembering herself. Remembering the woman she used to be before she became careful. Before she learned to hide her emotions behind polite smiles and quiet words. Ethan, without meaning to, reminded her that she was still alive inside, that her heart could still stir, still feel warmth, still tremble with confusion and beauty. But she also knew how fragile peace could be. One wrong step, one misunderstanding, and everything she had built could fall apart. So she told herself it was just a moment in time, a small ripple in an otherwise still lake. Yet, as summer stretched on, Claire began to realize that peace wasn't the same as happiness. And every day, as she passed Ethan in the hallway, or shared quiet meals across the table, that difference became harder to ignore. Something had begun. She didn't know what it was or where it would lead, but she knew deep inside that the house by the lake would never feel quite the same again. The days after Ethan moved in passed quietly, but the air in the house felt different, now more alive, yet heavier somehow. David was often gone for work, leaving the home still and echoing with its own emptiness. Claire tried to stay busy with her daily routines, watering plants, doing laundry, organizing her small art corner. But she couldn't ignore the presence that lingered in every room. Ethan Dot, he wasn't a noisy presence. He moved gently, spoke softly, and carried himself with a calm that made her uneasy in ways she didn't understand. Every morning he sat by the kitchen counter with his laptop, scrolling through job listings while sipping coffee. Sometimes he'd glance at her and smile politely, and she'd feel that same flicker she had tried to push away since his first night home. One afternoon, she noticed him sitting on the back porch, staring at the lake. The sun was falling low, painting everything gold. She hesitated at the door before stepping out. "You're quiet today," she said, trying to sound casual. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how things turned out. I thought I'd have life figured out by now." Claire leaned against the railing beside him. "No one really does," she replied softly. "We just pretend to." He laughed a low, tired sound. "You sound like you've been there." "Ha," she admitted, eyes still on the lake. "I thought marriage would fix everything." "It didn't. It just made me realize peace and happiness aren't the same thing." Ethan turned his head slightly, studying her face. "You don't seem unhappy," he said. "I'm not," she answered quickly, then paused. Just ... settled. That word hung in the air between them. Settled. It sounded safe, but it also sounded like giving up. Ethan didn't respond, and neither did she. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For a long while, they just stood there, side by side. To people who barely knew each other, yet felt strangely connected by something invisible that night. After David called to say he'd be staying in Portland for 2 more days, Claire cooked dinner for 2. They ate together at the table, the candles flickering softly as rain began to fall outside. The conversation flowed easily this time. They talked about music, travel, favorite movies, small dreams they hadn't shared with anyone else. Ethan told her he used to love photography, but had stopped after his camera broke years ago. "I guess it felt pointless," he said. "I was good at capturing moments, but not at living them." "Then start again," Claire encouraged, her voice gentle. Sometimes the right moment needs time to return. He looked at her with surprise, then a soft smile. You really think so? I do, she said. You see the world in ways most people miss. You just need to trust that again. The warmth in his eyes that followed made her heart beat faster. She looked away, pretending to focus on her food. The rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence between them with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. After dinner, she found herself standing by the window again, watching the raindrops race down the glass. She thought of Ethan's eyes, his quiet smile. The way he had listened to her not as a stepson or a polite guest, but as someone who truly saw her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone had done that. The next morning, she woke early to the smell of coffee. Ethan had already brewed a pot and left a cup for her on the counter. There was a note beside it. Good luck with your meeting today. You'll do great. She stared at the note longer than she should have, smiling before tucking it into her notebook. The smallest things, his thoughtfulness, his calm presence were beginning to mean too much. She knew it, but she couldn't stop it. Over the following week, their connection deepened without words. They didn't cross any lines, yet every look and every small exchange carried something unspoken. When they talked, it wasn't about facts or chores. It was about feelings, life, meaning. And each time, she felt herself drawn closer to the warmth of his voice. One evening, the power flickered during another rainstorm. Claire lit a few candles in the living room, the glow casting soft light across the walls. Ethan came in carrying his camera. I fixed it, he said proudly. Thought I'd test it out again. She smiled. That's wonderful. Take a picture of the storm. It's beautiful in its own way. He turned the camera toward her instead. I'd rather take one of this. You, here, with the candles and the rain outside. It feels ... real. Her breath caught. Ethan, I know, he said quickly, lowering the camera. I just meant to look peaceful. I haven't seen you look like that before. The moment lingered, filled with warmth and guilt all at once. She nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered. After he went to his room, Claire stayed there in the candlelight, her heart restless. She didn't want to admit it, but she was starting to care too much. The sound of the rain reminded her of the night she met David, the hope she had felt then. The comfort she had found in his stability. But now, years later, that stability felt like stillness. And Ethan, without meaning to, had stirred something awake in her that she thought had died long ago. The next morning, she tried to distance herself. She spent the day outside, running errands, avoiding the quiet spaces that made her think too much. But when she returned home, Ethan was there, sitting by the lake with his camera. She hesitated before walking over. You're out here again, she said. He smiled without looking up. This place feels different now. It's peaceful, but not lonely. She nodded, watching the light shimmer across the water. That's what I love about it. It listens. He turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. You deserve to be listened to, Claire. Not just by this lake. By someone who really hears you. His words broke something inside, hers softly, silently. She looked away, blinking fast. You should focus on your new start, Ethan, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You're young. You have time to find everything you're looking for. He smiled sadly. Maybe, but not everything you find is meant to stay. That night, Claire couldn't sleep again. The rain had stopped, but her thoughts wouldn't. She knew she was walking a fragile line. One that could ruin everything if she wasn't careful. But no matter how hard she tried to suppress it, the truth was simple. Ethan had reminded her of her own heart. He didn't know it, and she'd never say it aloud. But in the silence of that house, between shared glances, unfinished words, and gentle understanding, something fragile yet powerful had begun to bloom. It wasn't love in the usual sense, and it wasn't a betrayal either. It was simply human, two lonely souls, seeing in each other what life had quietly taken away. And though Claire didn't know it yet, that connection was leading toward a night that would change everything. It was late. August, when the storm rolled in from the mountains. Dark clouds swallowing the sunset and painting the sky in shades of gray. The house by the lake shuddered under the wind. Claire stood by the window, watching the rain pour down in sheets, listening to thunder rumble through the forest. David had called earlier to say he wouldn't make it home that night. The highway was closed due to flooding. That meant it would just be her and Ethan in the house. She didn't think much of it, at least not out loud. But somewhere deep inside, she felt a restless energy she couldn't explain. The lights flickered twice and then went out completely. The storm had knocked the power out. The house was swallowed by darkness. Claire sighed softly and went to find candles. As she lit them one by one, the warm glow filled the room, soft and golden, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The world outside was chaos, but inside, everything felt strangely calm. Ethan came downstairs holding 2 mugs. "Hot tea," he said with a faint smile. "It's all I could make with the gas stove." His hair was damp from checking the generator outside. Claire smiled, accepting the mug. "Thank you," she said. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and she quickly looked away. They sat together in the living room, surrounded by candlelight, the storm raging just beyond the windows. The air felt heavy, but not from fear, from something deeper, quieter, harder to name. The sound of rain against the glass seemed to fill the silence between them. Ethan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You ever notice how storms make everything feel closer?" he asked. Claire smiled faintly. "You mean like being trapped in the same space?" He shook his head. "No. I mean how they strip things down. When the world goes quiet, you start hearing yourself more clearly." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to. "Sometimes silence is the loudest thing," she said softly. They talked for a while after that, about simple things as plans once the weather cleared, her work, books they both liked. It was normal conversation, but there was an undertone to it, a quiet awareness that neither wanted to acknowledge. Every time their eyes met, Claire felt her chest tighten. The light flickered and the thunder outside rolled again, closer this time. When she stood to check a window, the candlelight caught her face. Ethan watched her quietly. "You look peaceful," he said suddenly. She turned, surprised. "Peaceful? In a storm." "Ah." He nodded. "You always look calm when everything else isn't." She laughed softly, but it faded quickly. "That's only because I've had practice." He tilted his head, studying her. "From what?" She hesitated, then sighed. "From pretending everything's fine, even when it's not." The honesty in her voice caught them both off guard. For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Claire could hear her heartbeat, feel the warmth from the candles brush against her skin. Ethan placed his mug down and leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly. Her breath caught. She turned away, trying to steady her voice. "Ethan, you shouldn't say things like that." "I'm not saying anything wrong," he said gently. "I just mean, you don't always have to carry everything alone." She sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. "You're kind," she said finally. "But some things are better left unsaid." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but silence doesn't erase truth, does it?" That sentence hung in the air like the echo of thunder. Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. They sat quietly after that, listening to the storm beat against the glass. The rain seemed endless, the world outside lost in darkness. Then, as another flash of lightning lit the room, Claire saw her reflection in the window, her face soft, eyes full of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She wasn't sure if it was loneliness, longing, or something in between. All she knew was that Ethan was sitting there beside her, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. Ethan spoke again, his voice low. "You remind me of a photograph I once took," he said. "A woman standing in the rain. She looked like she was waiting for something, but she didn't know what." Claire smiled sadly. Maybe she was waiting for herself. He nodded. "Maybe." Another flash of lightning filled the room, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked. There was no distance between them, just unspoken understanding. Neither of them moved closer. They didn't need to. The connection was already there, steady and undeniable. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "This isn't supposed to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. We're family." Ethan's voice was calm, but full of quiet emotion. "I know. That's why nothing will happen. Some feelings just remind us we're alive. That's all." Tears welled in her eyes, not from guilt, but from the weight of what he'd said. "I just don't want to lose myself again," she admitted softly. "You won't," he said. "You've already found yourself tonight." They sat like that for a long time, saying nothing more. The storm outside began to fade, the thunder growing distant. The candles burned low, their light gentle and warm. There was no scandal, no secret act, only silence and understanding. A connection that lived entirely in emotion, not touch. When the rain finally slowed, Claire stood and looked toward the window. "It's over," she whispered. Ethan joined her. The lake shimmered faintly under the soft glow of the remaining candles. The world seemed washed clean, peaceful again. "Thank you for the tea," she said quietly. He smiled. "Any time." They said good night, and she went upstairs, her heart full of mixed emotions. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but something had changed deep inside her. The boundaries were still there, untouched, but her heart had crossed a line she couldn't ignore. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about his words. "Some feelings just remind us we're alive." She turned to look at the empty space beside her where David usually slept. She felt the quiet ache of years spent, being careful, being strong, being silent. For the first time in a long while, she felt something different: warmth, awareness, life. She closed her eyes, not in regret, but in understanding. What had passed between her and Ethan wasn't love in the ordinary sense. It was the awakening of something long asleep inside her, part of her that remembered how to feel deeply. To see beauty again, to breathe without fear. When morning came, the storm was gone. The sun shone on the wet grass. Birds sang, and the world looked new. Ethan was already outside, standing by the lake, camera in hand, capturing the sunrise. Claire watched him from the window for a moment, her heart steady but full. Nothing had happened that night, but everything had changed. The morning after the storm felt brighter than any morning before. The air was crisp, washed clean by rain, and sunlight sparkled across the lake like glass. Claire stood at the kitchen window, holding her coffee, watching Ethan out by the dock. He was taking pictures of the sunrise, his camera clicking softly, his posture calm and steady. For a moment she felt something quiet in her heart, a mix of peace and ache. The night before had changed something inside her, though no words could truly describe it. Nothing had been said aloud, and nothing improper had happened. Yet the silence they had shared had been full of meaning. When David returned that afternoon, everything looked normal. The house smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon bread. Claire greeted him with her usual warm smile. Ethan helped carry his father's bags inside, speaking lightly about the storm and how they'd managed without power. No one mentioned the long night of candlelight or the quiet understanding that had filled the house. It remained unspoken, locked away in Claire's heart like a secret she didn't want to name. Life settled back into routine. David returned to work, and the hum of normalcy filled the air again. Yet Claire noticed subtle changes in herself. She laughed more easily, spoke more gently, and spent more time in the garden. It wasn't that she was happier, it was that she was awake again. Something inside her had stirred after years of silence, and though she tried to ignore it every time she saw Ethan, her heart reminded her of that night, the flicker of candlelight, the quiet comfort of being truly seen. A week later, Ethan received a job offer in Seattle. He told them over dinner, smiling, though there was a shadow of sadness in his eyes. "It's a small position at a design firm," he said, "but it's a start." David clapped his son on the back, proud and relieved. "That's great, son. I knew things would work out." Claire smiled too, her chest tightening. "You'll do well there," she said softly. "You always find your way." He looked at her briefly, a small knowing look that said more than words could. She felt her pulse quicken, then quickly looked down at her plate. The days that followed felt slower, heavier. Claire busied herself helping Ethan pack. She folded his shirts, found boxes, and made sandwiches for the road trip ahead. Every moment felt ordinary on the surface, but underneath, a quiet sadness lingered. Each small task carried the weight of goodbye. On his last morning, the house was still. David had already left early for a meeting. Claire stood in the kitchen, making breakfast one final time for the two of them. Ethan entered quietly, hair slightly messy, holding a small bag. "Smells good," he said with a faint smile. "It's just toast and eggs," she replied, returning his smile. "Fuel for the road." They ate together in near silence. The ticking clock filled the spaces between their words. When they finished, Ethan stood and looked around the kitchen as if memorizing it. "You made this place feel like home," he said. Claire tried to keep her voice steady. "It is your home, Ethan. It always will be." He nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. He walked to the window, gazing out at the lake where the storm had once raged. "I'll miss this view," he said. Then, softer, "and I'll miss you." Her breath caught. She wanted to say something, anything, but the right words wouldn't come. So she walked closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll do great things. You just have to believe that." He turned toward her, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You know, before I came here, I felt lost," he said. "Like I'd failed everyone, including myself. But you reminded me what it feels like to matter again." She blinked fast, trying to hide her tears. "You did that yourself, Ethan. You just needed time to see it." He smiled, then reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I wanted you to have this." Inside was a photograph, the one he'd taken during the storm. It was of her sitting by the candles, her face calm and thoughtful, framed by shadows and light. She stared at it for a long moment, speechless. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's how I'll remember this place." The calm in the middle of the storm. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the photo. "It's beautiful," she whispered. When it was time for him to leave, they stood at the door for a long moment. The sunlight poured in behind him, golden and soft. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said. He smiled gently. "You too, Claire." He paused, eyes holding hers. "And thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "You gave me something too," she said quietly. "You reminded me that hearts don't grow old, they just grow quiet." For a moment, neither moved. The silence between them was deep and kind, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then Ethan gave her one last look, a small, warm smile, and turned to go. She stood in the doorway, watching him walk to his car, watching until the sound of the engine faded down the road. That night, the house felt empty again. David was home, talking about work, laughing, reading the newspaper. Everything looked the same, yet to Claire, nothing was. She went to the window, the same one she'd looked through during the storm, and saw the lake glowing faintly under the moonlight. The world was calm again, but her heart wasn't. She took out the photograph Ethan had given her and placed it on the table. The image glowed softly under the lamplight, a memory frozen in time. She traced the edge of the photo with her finger, her mind drifting back to that night, that feeling, that quiet understanding. She didn't regret anything. What she felt wasn't wrong. It was simply real. A moment that reminded her she was human, that love didn't always need to be spoken or acted upon to exist.